So what piques your interest today?
Well, there's multiple levels of interest, but I
Okay.
think you are kind of spot on with really how do you engage with employees and
Yeah.
how do you, in an organization, find a real-time way to do that and like do it in an efficient way.
Yeah.
And I've really liked some of your posts lately, really about what are kind of people on the factory floor seeing, thinking, right? As being a person who has spent so many years in this industry, I think it's all really useful and relevant. And I think there's a lot of other professionals and leaders out there that feel the same. I think just the live event probably is the timing problem, but I think sharing this with multiple people will be definitely of interest.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining. Okay. Well, we'll go right through it. We'll go right ahead. For people who don't know me, my background is supply chain in automotive. And then I left the automotive tier one world 7 years ago to start my own business. My mission is to change the culture in the automotive industry. This internal podcasting idea combines everything that I'm all about. So I'm all about leadership and culture and
Right.
connecting people. And then when I started my podcast, Automotive Leaders Podcast, 5 years ago, I thought, well, what if you just put the two together? What
Right.
if we have authentic leadership and there's a way to use this tech to connect people? So that's what this is all about. Employee engagement, as you know, is at a low. According to Gallup, the most recent numbers are at the US, we're about 31% of employees being highly engaged. That means that we're getting the best of everybody. Now, the best practice organizations are up in the 70% level. So my question is, how do we get people up to this 70% level? That's one of the most critical questions. How do we engage this multilingual workforce? So my question to you, Guillermo, thank you for joining. And maybe if you could put this in the chat or just tell me whatever works for you, but how critical is internal communication to employee engagement? I know whenever I work with a client, any company, and I see the employee engagement survey, communication is always up there. So tell me, Jill, you just tell me or put it in the chat, whatever's easiest for you.
I would just say it's really the most important things to employees tied to satisfaction because if you don't give them an idea of what's happening in the company, they will draw their own conclusions.
Yes,
And generally, the what ifs are never on the positive side, right? There's some
exactly.
speculation that there are secrets being kept and they're not telling me everything. And then I think we have the demotivation, the disengagement of employees, et cetera. So.
Yes. And people go to the dark side, right? They just assume if you're not communicating or you're not communicating properly, they form, like you said, their own stories. Guillermo, what about you? How critical do you think internal communication is to employee engagement?
I think it's very important in everything that we do. Communication is key, whether it's writing, speaking, nonverbal, regardless of the topic. Like it's very important that communication is clear, concise, and I think a lot of the issues that we face are due because of miscommunication. The things were not clear, and then it's all like a spiral effect. It just keeps building, building, building up. It's out of control because the communication was not right.
Yeah, that's right. And according to the McKinsey research, internal communication will boost employee productivity by 20 to 25%. And my next question is, what is the ultimate objective of your internal communication efforts? Because there's a lot of plans and a lot of things that people do, but what's the ultimate objective, Jill?
For me, it's really putting down a foundation of trust
Yes.
and really setting the climate for a relationship with your employee base where we do trust one another and we can have open dialogue and management welcomes two-way communication, right? I think you have to start somewhere. Even with one-way communication is really a better place to start. But then it's really that building the foundation of trust.
Yeah, I couldn't have said that any better. I totally agree with you. And when we talk about the objective of internal communications, it's about connecting people, it's about building trust, it's about building connection, and it is two ways. So often, internal communications are about taking leadership messages and forcing them down. It's not about hearing the voices from the shop floor and amplifying those up. Guillermo, what do you think about that?
I agree. One of the challenges, topics we've been discussing lately is exactly that. How do we get the message across to all the levels of the organization, especially on the shop floor. It's difficult when your message is not sent in a way that people that pick an operator, for example. They're not using their phones. Sometimes they don't have emails or company emails. They focus on what they're doing on their tasks. And then the short breaks we use for relaxing, eating, disconnecting for a moment. So that's where we find the challenge of how do you connect with your whole workforce, right? When sometimes it could be very challenging because the role might not give you the time or very limited time. And if your message is too complex or delivered in a way that it's not easy to receive, then you're failing.
Yeah, well said. So often we speak in corporate speak, and that doesn't connect. It doesn't connect people.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that leads us into how do you reach the shop floor employees? And what I find is that a lot of companies that I work with, they know that the employees on the shop floor don't have email. But that's the largest population of your employees, typically in the automotive space. And reaching them can be a real challenge. I work with a client right now, and we do an internal podcast. And the way that we get it to the shop floor employees is through a QR code, because some employees don't want a company app on their phone. They may not have a corporate email, but they've all got a smartphone, but they don't want that company app sitting on their personal phone. I mean, that's a bit of a generalization, but people are reluctant. They don't like that idea. So we QR code it into them. So they hit the QR code, and then we have posters on the shop floor. We have table tents in the break rooms so that people can hit the QR code and listen to it. And of course, the beauty of a podcast is you get to listen to it when you want to, on your terms, not when somebody is scheduling a town hall or scheduling a corporate communications. You get to listen to it whenever you want to. That's the number one benefit of audio, is that it's on demand.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would just say, Jan, as an HR practitioner for many years, even the engagement surveys and other things, employees really don't want to have to go to a website, right?
Exactly.
I think the whole access, right, is very important that you think about how do you connect in the right way at the right time. And again, it kind of ties back to that trust. They may not have the trust initially, but you're trying to build trust. So if you're thoughtful and use the QR codes and strategies you talked about, I think you're off to a really good start.
Yes, I would agree. And people want to hear stories, right? They don't want to hear corporate speak. And the power of audio, you can hear the tone in somebody's voice. You can hear the warmth in somebody's voice. It has a much higher retention level than the written word. And when people can consume that, and with audio, as a human, you have to put yourself in the conversation to listen to it. So the retention level is actually higher than with written communication. And of course, the other part of reaching shop floor employees, I was at a client's plant in North Carolina last week, and the primary languages on the shop floor are English, Spanish, and Ukrainian. Now, how do you reach all those people with consistent messaging? And that's when this audio translation comes into play. I have not done Ukrainian yet, but that's on my list. I will nail Ukrainian in a month. But Spanish, I've got that
I listened
nailed.
to it, Jen.
Did you?
Yeah, on Monday, on my way to one of our divisions, it popped up on my Spotify alerts on your channel, on your podcast. And I listened to it, and it was very, very, very close to how we would speak in Spanish, at least in Mexico. There were very few words that I get it. It was really the translation.
Yeah.
But just like very minor. I'm very picky, so probably most of the audience would not notice it. But it was pretty cool, and I got to listen to you speak in Spanish. That was great.
Isn't that wild? I know. Well,
It
here's the key to this, right? This is the process behind it. So I start off with AI with the audio. So I load the English audio into the AI. The AI only gets it about 70% right. So I have a human translator. She's in Mexico, and she's an English teacher in Mexico. So as you can imagine, she's fluent in both languages.
Okay.
She then takes the audio and she corrects the transcript, which we then back into the AI. And we go through several iterations of that until we get it right. Then we send it to an audio editor to adjust the speed, because AI, you can't just use the AI translation. The speed is all off and it'll sound robotic and it doesn't sound like natural language. And when you're connecting people, yeah, and you're talking about culture, it's got to be right. This can't be 70% right. So I'm thrilled to hear, Guillermo, that you thought, I claim my accuracy is about 97% accurate. Does that sound about right to you?
I would rate it 98, 99. In general, it was a translation that anybody speaking Spanish in Mexico can understand and can follow.
That's great. That's great. Any thoughts on that, Jill?
I would just say, number one, I think the most important part of this whole thing is really reflecting on who's your audience, making this great effort as an organization to say, I want to connect with you. I've invested in making sure I can do that in your mother tongue. And I think the perfection isn't as important as really the whole spirit of it. At least in my view, I think it means a lot, right? I think it sends a strong message about the culture and intention of the company. And of course, people that don't work in the auto industry that might be doing translation may not know certain terms. But I think if people could follow 90% perhaps versus sitting through an English version where the retention rate is like 10%.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
We have just really, really made a dent in communication. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. You're right.
And just to expand on what you're doing is, at least for me, at the end of the day or midday, my brain gets tired when I'm speaking on my second language. So if I want to listen to something in the afternoon, I want to do it in my native language because I'm tired. I don't want to continue speaking, my second language or third language. So that's also an advantage that you're doing with this translation.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jill, have you tried an internal podcast before?
I have not. So it's not something but it's definitely something that I think is a good solution and something I'm interested in doing perhaps as a future evolution. So,
okay. Guillermo, you have some sort of an internal podcast at Magna, don't you?
We do, an employee one, yes.
Is it audio or is it video?
Most of them are with videos.
Yeah. So how do people on the shop floor access them? Can they access them?
That is a great question for the marketing team and the HR team. My opinion is it will be limited. We could play them in the cafeterias. I've seen that. But yeah, that's part of the challenge that we have.
And the other challenge is that people often say they have a podcast and they don't have a podcast. They have somebody talking on a webinar or a video like this. And then they put it out on the internet and they call it a podcast. That's not a podcast. That's a video. That's not, you want something that people can listen to when they want to hear it. And if you are going to force them to be in front of a screen, they're much less likely to watch it or listen to it. That's why audio is far more powerful. I'm going to share some information on podcasts with you. No surprise that podcasting is growing. It's a growing medium. Very few of us knew what podcasting was in 2006. But I want to share with you this last stat right here about the number of shows. And I'm going to flip for a moment to talk about external podcasts, like my podcast, like Automotive Leaders. So there's about just over 4 million shows. And of course, each show has multiple episodes, but only 352,000 published in the last 30 days, which means it's active. What that tells you is that the failure rate on podcasting is extremely high. Most podcasts fail before they reach the 10th episode. And I'm going to share with you why in a moment. And because the same issues apply with an internal podcast. 73% of listeners tend to listen on their cell phones, which is why it's a perfect medium for the shop floor. Then 49% listen in their homes and 28% listen in their car. I would say I cover all three. I've got about 7 podcasts on my Spotify playlist, and I'm bouncing around, whether it's in the car, whether I'm walking, whether it's at home. But this is where I'm all over the place with it. But what I love is that I get to listen to it when I want to. Jill, where do you listen to podcasts mostly?
I would say the most frequent is really through my phone or in the car. I would say when I'm on the go, when I'm on a walk, when I have movement that I'm doing, I try to optimize it to kind of do something I enjoy, something I might learn from. And for me, those aspects of it are very important and convenient.
Yeah, I would agree. Guillermo, when do you listen?
On my car or on a plane, wherever I'm moving to my destination, I use my time for podcasts, mostly in the mornings.
It's always interesting. Okay, demographics. Now, sometimes we think that podcasts are only for young kids. They absolutely are not. I'm proof of that. What I want to show with this slide is that it hits all demographics. And the demographic, the area that's increasing at the fastest rate, believe it or not, is the 55 plus. So when you talk about an internal podcast, it's hitting all demographics, because one of the biggest challenges we have right now is how do I connect with Gen Z, and how do I connect with millennials, and how do I keep the boomers or Gen X engaged? Podcasting crosses all demographics. And I think that when you have an internal podcast, it gives your company a more innovative feel. From a recruitment standpoint, if you're trying to recruit Gen Z and you say, hey, we have an internal podcast, use the link, go listen to some of these episodes, it really does elevate your brand.
Yeah, I would also say it's a great recruitment tool.
Yes, it is. In fact, I was talking to a company once. We didn't actually go through with this, but I was talking to them about doing like 4 or 5 episodes specifically for recruitment to talk about the company and the culture and what they do. And that way, when they actually publish the open position, they can say, oh, and if you want to learn more about company X, listen to this short podcast series. So there's many different ways that you can use this internal podcast. We've talked about multilingual workforce. Okay, you ready? Listen to this. When I first did this, it just cracks me up. But okay, here we go.
How do you make sure that you're getting your leadership messages through every single person in your company? The answer is simple. It's an internal podcast. And we are now able to use AI to generate your podcast, your very own company radio station, in multiple languages. ¿Cómo te aseguras de que tus mensajes de liderazgo realmente les estén llegando a todas y cada una de las personas en tu empresa? La respuesta es sencilla, con un podcast interno. Y ahora podemos utilizar la inteligencia artificial para generar tu podcast, tu propia emisora de radio empresarial en varios idiomas. Wie können Sie sicherstellen, dass Ihre Führungsbotschaften jeden einzelnen Mitarbeiter in Ihrem Unternehmen erreichen? Die Antwort ist einfach, über einen internen Podcast, und wir sind jetzt in der Lage, mit Hilfe von KI Ihren Podcast, Ihr eigenes Firmenradio in mehreren Sprachen zu erstellen. Comment s'assurer que vos messages sur le leadership atteignent chaque personne dans votre entreprise? La réponse est simple, via un podcast interne, et nous sommes désormais en mesure d'utiliser l'IA pour générer votre podcast, votre propre station de radio d'entreprise en plusieurs langues.
I mean, it just blows my mind that it takes my voice. We took the English video snippet, and then we've now identified translators that we work with in those 3 different languages. And we'll have a Ukrainian one by the end of the month. And it's iteration after iteration. You have to go back and forth to get it right, and then you have to play with the speed. But the fact that you could have leaders in your organization speaking different languages, that coming out in audio in their voice, it's incredibly powerful. I have a client, I recorded their Q1 earnings for their employees, call with their CEO. And their Mexican operations thought that the CEO actually spoke Spanish because it's his voice.
Wow.
I think it's pretty cool, and I think it's really the future.
Yes. I love it because it connects people.
How
it's
do you
about
make
people
sure that
and
you're-
leadership. Okay. I'm going to go through this very quickly because I do not want to bore you to death with podcast technical things, but there's some things that you need to know if you're thinking about doing a podcast. You need a strategy. Jill, you mentioned this earlier. You need a plan. What are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to move the needle on your employee engagement survey? Are you trying to focus more on recognition? Do you want the voice of the shop floor employees to come back up, or do you want the leadership message to go through the organization? Might be all of the above. I recorded a shop floor area lead last week in North Carolina, and she had just completed training. And she was talking about the training and what she learned from it. I got a chill listening to her. The pride that she had in this training, and she talked about how it gave her more confidence to do the job that she's doing, blew my mind. You could never get that with a written word. You had to hear it in her voice. It was amazing. Like any business initiative, you got to have a plan. What are you trying to do? Jill, any thoughts on that?
No, I would agree with you that fluctuation in people's voice, the excitement, right? It's not replaceable. It's not, translatable in any other form. So I agree with you in that, thinking through what your strategy is, all the different facets, as well as maybe thinking both short and long term, just like you would with any strategy, right? We might start here, but where do we hope this goes and how do we hope it evolves, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it takes time. You really have to have a team of people that are involved in this. Now, one lesson learned for me is you've got to have ambassadors for the podcast. And you might want to pick a couple of people from the shop floor, maybe somebody from HR, maybe somebody from marketing. But there needs to be a team of people that are committed to making this a success as it evolves. And you need a host. You need a storyteller, somebody who can bring out the stories, the authentic stories from people and reach the targets. What is the strategy for the podcast? Which, of course, this is the work that I do that I absolutely love doing. So you have to have a host because it needs to be conversational. It can't be just one person talking into the mic. And then you need a process. Go ahead, Jill. Do you have?
No, I was just going to say, I think you're spot on with really kind of that dialogue. And I just wonder, not every CEO is a natural, right? So how do you either prepare them or decide who's the voice that needs to be part of this, right? Because I think trying to fabricate something versus something that really is quality, right? It just seems like a very relevant issue. And I can think of a few people that I've worked with who may not be the best person, right?
No, you're right. And then the other thing is internal comms teams typically don't have the bandwidth for this.
Right.
Because it is an awful lot of work behind it. And that's why I love doing it. I'm the host for the tier one that I work with right now. I'm the host. I work with the comms lead on the strategy. We look at the metrics. We may pivot. We may adjust. We may change the messaging based on what's going on in the business. But you've got to have somebody who can host it and they're a good storyteller. Otherwise, it'll go flat.
Absolutely.
And there is a process. There's a lot of things to do. You have to build a pipeline. Guillermo knows a little bit more about the process now because he was recently on the Auto Supply Chain Profits podcast. But people have to be prepped. They have to know where the conversation is going. It doesn't have to be perfect, but they got to know where the conversation is going. You got to have the right environment. They can't be in an environment where there's a lot of noise or a lot of echo. There are show notes that have to be prepared. There's a lot to it, right, Guillermo? A lot more than you thought, right?
Yes, but you know what? That's what helped me and all of us prepare for that episode. It was the right preparation to do, and I'm very happy with the outcome.
Yeah, good. So there is a process to it. There are metrics. The podcast hosting platform, I can provide metrics on an internal podcast, because that's called a private podcast, that can tell you in which city. I can't nail it to the person because obviously you'd be getting into privacy issues, but it uses IP addresses. So I can tell you the city that got the number of downloads for the podcast in each individual city. And I can tell you how long they listened to the episode for, which you can't get in most types of forms of communication. Because email, you can tell who's opened it, but you can't tell who's read it. And I love the fact that I can see the number of downloads. So I know which plants are adopting and listening to the podcast and which ones are not.
I would just say that's really powerful and helpful, because then you can share that with your internal leadership teams. It's a good indicator to HR, perhaps maybe issues in your locations, whether it's publicizing it. It just kind of gives you data to work with and hopefully be able to drive those numbers up.
Yes, absolutely. And these podcast platforms, their ability to drill down that data improves all the time. It's fascinating to watch the technical side of it. Now, the tech, you've got to have a good microphone. If you don't have a decent microphone, forget it. I will never record anybody on a computer microphone. So you've got to have a microphone. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. Some of the microphones that we recommend to our guests are $70. So it doesn't have to be expensive. And you can do it on a virtual platform. So you don't have to have a podcast studio. You can do it on a virtual platform. You need a microphone and a headset. The headset can be anything, can be earpods, whatever. But the microphone is a critical piece of equipment. Okay, so the budget. So I offer a couple of different packages, Jill. If you feel that you've got the bandwidth to do it internally, I can help you and coach you to get you up and running, or anything in between to handling absolutely everything, from working with you on the strategy to hosting it to publishing it. And I have one client right now that all in, I handle everything for them, and they love it because she doesn't have the time. She just wants to focus on the strategy and look at the metrics and the content, and she lets me go. And I absolutely love that. And then 7 is promotion. A podcast goes nowhere internally unless you promote it heavily. And that comes back to the team. You need podcast success ambassadors in your organization. All these 7 steps are really important. If you don't do number 7, you can forget it because nobody knows it's there.
Right. Is it typical, Jan, to see engagement go up from launch to kind of getting like more of a regimented flow? I would think if people listen to the first and second episode, then they start telling their colleagues about it, like that snowballing effect really does kind of help drive it up.
It starts slow. Podcast adoption is slow. It starts really slow, and then it's word of mouth and people catch on. And then as you start to interview people at different plants, they're like, oh, did you know we interviewed Billy Bob in North Carolina and he was amazing? Right. Oh, I didn't know about that. So it builds over time.
One thing that's on my mind about this, and other people like me might have a similar thought or question, is the frequency of releasing episodes important to that engagement factor?
Great question. 2 weeks is the sweet spot, every 2 weeks.
Okay.
If you can release once a week, that's better, but I tend to think that's almost a bit of overkill. And that'll be tough. That's hard. That's a lot of work to do a podcast every week. Every 2 weeks is the sweet spot. The important thing with podcasting, you got to be consistent. Right. So with Automotive Leaders, I release every other Thursday at the same time. And people come to rely on it. You know yourself when you listen to podcasts, you know when a new episode is coming out and you expect it.
Right. So that consistency is important, and like bi-weekly. And I would think for organizations who might be considering this, but feeling like that's a little bit too much, like it's perhaps better to start up with a 1-month cadence and then like kind of turn up the knob to like bi-weekly as things develop or the organization gets more comfortable with it. Is that also a fair?
I wouldn't do it monthly. People aren't they're gonna forget about it. I wouldn't even do monthly. It's better to do bi-weekly but short episodes.
And what do you think the right duration of time is for something like this audience? Is it 15 minutes or less, or is it 30 minutes?
Yes, 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay. All right.
You lose people otherwise, and I can see it in the data and the metrics. That is absolutely the sweet spot. I would say the perfect time is 12 minutes.
Okay. I could see this also being beneficial for internal leaders, like with a different focus, perhaps at a different duration of time. An opportunity to connect with leaders and build some other communication strategies through the organization.
Absolutely. And most of my background is in supply chain. And I said, if I ever went back to the corporate world, which I have no plans on doing so, but if I did, I would have a podcast for supply chain. And I would be doing it from a functional level, and I would be talking to suppliers. I would be featuring buyers, products. There's so many different ways that you can take this for communication. It just comes down to you and what's important to you and the company and what you're trying to achieve. Recognition is a good one. Recognition at different plants. Maybe a plant got a lost time award or health and safety. There's so many different things many different ways you can go with it. So that's it. That's the presentation for today. I hope I gave you some information, some things to think about.
Definitely. Like I said, I think it definitely is the future. And it's really the way people want communication.
Yeah.
Like you said, on their terms, on their time, when it's right for them, when they're in the right mood. So I think it's a timely topic, and I certainly enjoyed it and appreciated your insight.
Well, thank you for joining. And if I can help you in any way, just let me know. Even if you're just playing around with it or you have some questions, I'm here. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, whatever. And I'm glad to help, really, because I'm a firm believer that this is the way to go.
I agree. And I appreciate that offer, Jan. I definitely will. Thank you so much.